Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today we're going to be replacing the front pads and rotors on this year 2016 Hyundai Elantra. This will be the same for the 2011 to 2016 year models. If this video does help you out, make sure you leave a comment below with the year, make, model of the vehicle it did help you on. First tip of this video, don't lean the tire on the vehicle when you take it off. Just set it off to the side, on the back side down. Don't put the rim face down too. So first tip. We get started real quick on my videos. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Check out my video library to find something else that might help you on your DIY project or a friend or family member. So tell everybody about me too. Next, we're going to turn the wheel to the driver's side. This makes it easier to access the bolts on the back side of the rotor, to get your caliper off, and then to remove your bracket soon. But first, before we go too far, we need to make sure we take the cap off of your reservoir. Just leave it loose on there. So if any fluid gets pushed back into the reservoir, it has somewhere to go. It doesn't want, or it won't blow out a seal trying to find somewhere to escape if it needs to. So just leave it there. Just leave it loose. Don't forget to tighten it up when we're all said and done. Next, I'm going to loosen up these production screws. I'm using an impact driver to do so with a Phillips head on it. You can see using the impact driver, I'm only holding tension, like I'm turning it, I'm twisting the screwdriver towards me or in the loose direction, and then using the hammer to push it in and turn at the same time. The hammer will do all the work. Don't push in with the screwdriver and then hit the hammer. You want the screwdriver to be more pushed out, and then let the screwdriver do the job. I get a lot of people saying they buy those and they don't work just because they're not using them right. So be careful with those things. If you need parts or tools, make sure you look for links in the description below. Here we are taking off the caliper itself. These are 14 millimeter bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. Take these bolts out, set them off to the side. Don't ruin them. They're pretty soft, so they're easy to ruin if you over tighten them or if you put like a jack on them or something. So be careful with them. Set them off to the side. Don't lose them. Usually the caliper comes off a lot easier than this, but you might run into this too. So in this case, the caliper was stuck on the rotor. Reason being, the pad is worn too much into the rotor and it's just stuck on a lip on the rotor. So you got to push the piston in to the caliper itself a little bit. I used this flathead screwdriver. Right here, you're destroying this brake pad, so you're not going to be able to reuse your brake pads, and I would highly recommend you do not reuse your brake pads. When you go to purchase your parts, make sure you find parts that have a hardware kit and boots if possible. I always recommend to replace the hardware and grease the sliders, which we're going to get to shortly. In this case, in this video, I'm just replacing the pads and the rotors. Customer is my niece, provided the parts, and I'm just putting on what she gave me. So I would highly recommend you get a pad kit that includes hardware. Now we are going to compress the piston back into the caliper. This is when you especially need to make sure your reservoir cap is loose, just in case you push fluid back into the reservoir, it has somewhere to escape. The little caliper compression tool I'm using is a little cheap one. I think it was about $12 at a local store. I have a more expensive one. It takes a lot longer to get it set up, and these ones are just way easier. I use this one way more often, so don't hesitate to buy one of these, especially if this is a job you're going to be doing on your own. You're probably going to do your brakes probably 4 times its whole life, so you shouldn't be using it too much. And if you do need one of them, make sure you look for a link in the description below to purchase one, and let me know how it goes if you do end up using it. It is pretty easy. You can see right here. You're going to push the piston as far as you can back into the caliper. I believe the back of your brake pad should bottom out on the actual caliper housing itself, so don't be afraid. Push it all the way in. The further in, the better. If you have anything leaking, if you see anything wet around your brake system, that is really not a good sign, and that is a sign that you need to start looking at something else. Would be a leak. And doing your brakes in this fashion, you do not need to bleed your brakes, so don't open the brake lines at any time if you're following this video. You can see I put the caliper right there on the strut. I'm letting it, or I hooked it up there, not letting it hang on the hose. Don't want to put any damage or cause any damage to the hose while you're doing a job. When you remove your brake pad, make sure you take in consideration where your wear indicators are at. On that one, it was on the top side of my inboard pad right here. So when I install the brake pad, make sure, or I'll make sure I install it in the same fashion. Another recommendation is to Use pictures. Take lots of pictures while you're doing your own job. So when you get to a point when you're reassembling, you could go back and look at it and say, oh, okay, that's where that went. Or that's how tight I should have got it or whatnot. While the caliper is off, I'm going to make sure that these slider pins freely slide. You don't want to have any restriction on these things. If these start getting restricted, it will cause the caliper to apply the brake pressure sideways or crooked, so you'll get a very uneven brake pad wear, but that'll also cause uneven braking, so won't get a nice full friction or a lot of surface friction if the pads don't evenly push. So these need to freely move. If we had a hardware kit that provided boots, we would be replacing the boots right here on the slider as well. So when you buy your brake pads, make sure it has all this stuff. I know I'm not replacing it here, but I would highly recommend that you replace it. But if you're going to do the bare minimum, do like I'm doing in this video. Make sure those sliders freely slide. They're nice and clean. Take time on this thing. The bolts here holding your bracket onto the spindle are a 14 millimeter. I prefer to use a 6-point socket. I'm using a breaker bar to remove them. When I tighten them up, I will be tightening them down to factory's torque specification, so stay tuned. If you need a torque wrench, there should be a link in the description for that too. With these 14 millimeter bolts loose, I'm going to use a 1/2-inch socket wrench and just take them off the rest of the way. Get them to where they're finger tight. So you know it takes about an hour and a half to get this job done. How much would it cost now? If you were to take it to a shop, you'd probably be spending somewhere around $300 to $400 for the parts and labor to get this job done. If you do it on your own, in your driveway, you know it's an hour and a half, like we said, how much will that cost? Each rotor on this vehicle, I believe, was around $60, and the pad kit that she got was around $30. That's the cheaper pad kit. The more expensive pad kit with hardware included would have been probably around $55, I believe, if that, for the really good ones. So in her case, she spent around, $120 and $50, $180 for the parts on this vehicle. And if you don't have them yet, there will be links for that too in the description. I know you guys love to hear that, so I'll keep telling you. In this case, in the video, we are reusing the shims or the hardware on this vehicle. If you're going to be doing that, which is the bare minimum, make sure you clean them off really well. You don't want any dust or debris on the shims right here, because it'll make the pads get stuck too. You want your pads to be able to apply pressure onto the rotor evenly, as evenly best possible. Here we're going to remove your screws that hold the caliper onto your spindle. That's actually your hub, so remove the rotor from the hub. I call these production screws. I'm not sure if that's the real name for them, but what it does is it makes production much easier if everything is held together. If it's all loose when you're putting everything back together, it's really hard to line everything up. This rotor was kind of hard to get off. It was seized onto the hub assembly. So you can see I'm using my mallet, and it got it right off. If for some reason you don't have your production screws, you could also use a lug nut or two to hold the rotor in place. You'll see in my other videos, if you want to go through my library, that method that I use, because not all rotors have those production screws. When you put your rotor on, make sure you line it up with the screw holes. Pretty simple, right? But who would have thought? You do not need to use an impact screwdriver to tighten these up. And I would highly, highly recommend you do not use an impact screwdriver to tighten these up. You just want them to be snug, just hand tight. I'm not going to go back through after this video and do anything else. I'm just tightening them up to this fashion right here. German torque specs, I think it's called. Good and tight. Impact driver, done. If you have any questions, make sure you comment below. Or if you have another vehicle, make sure you check out my library. I love to help you guys out if anything possible. Just like, subscribe, and share while you're tagging along too. I will probably have another hopefully helpful video coming out for you soon. But now on the reassembly process, we may need to make sure we use factory torque specifications to tighten these bolts up. These 14 millimeter bolts, I'm going to use a 6-point socket and a 1/2-inch torque wrench. I'm going to torque these bolts down to 70 foot-pounds when it comes down to it. I'm going to use my 1/2-inch socket wrench to get them snug tight, good and tight, and then use that torque wrench. On the torque wrench, I used to go to a couple clicks. I would go click, click. As long as it was clicking, I thought it was fine. I've had a lot of people recommend to me, just go to the first click. Because sometimes that second click is catastrophic. I haven't had it happen to me, but it's probably happened. So just go to that first click. 70 foot-pounds on both of these. It doesn't matter which one you tighten down first. Mechanics tool set. If you don't have one, guess where you can find it? Description below. Remember when I took that pad off? The wear indicator was on the inboard pad on the top right there. So I installed that one in the same fashion. You should probably do the same. These should slide into place. If they have any resistance or it's hard to push your pads on, double check that you're doing everything right. You don't want anything to be touching the rotor. You don't want any hang-ups. Everything should move freely and easily. All right, now we're getting the caliper put back on. These 14 millimeter bolts, we are going to tighten these up to 20 foot-pounds. 20 foot-pounds is not much, and that sounds, you probably want to go a little bit tighter. But given what these bolts are, how strong they are, and what they're holding on, just 20 foot-pounds is all it takes to tighten these up. Make sure you use a torque wrench, or if you're not using one, do not go too tight on these things. These ones are very easy to break. After you get these torqued down, go ahead and turn the wheel straight again so it's easier to put the wheel back on. Before you put the wheel back on, we want to make sure we pump the brakes. You want to pump the brakes until you get the pressure built up in the pedal. Usually 3 to 5 pumps will give you a nice stiff pedal. If it doesn't, you might have air in your system, but you should not have opened your system anywhere in this job or the way that we did it. So look for leaks somewhere. After you do get the pressure built up in the pedal, make sure you get the cap put back on your fluid reservoir and get the tire put back on. After you tighten this cap up, you might need to clean up a little bit of a mess, and then all you have is your tire, and that's it. Get this tire torqued down. I torqued mine to 90 foot-pounds. I believe factory specification was around 80, but I personally do all my wheels to 90 foot-pounds, and if that's wrong, comment below. Let me know and why. Make sure to check out my video library before you go too far to find other helpful DIY maintenance procedures. Like, subscribe, and share. Maybe one of these 2 videos right here will help you out as well. I appreciate you guys staying tuned. I'll see you guys on the next hopefully helpful video. Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies.